Down. Hi everyone, and welcome to another Azure Greg live stream. I'm just going straight into adding. Here we go, Ahmed. Nice to see you. So how are you?
Nice to see you, mate. Thank you for having me.
I'm speaking to someone from the future. I'm speaking to you from the future because it's Saturday morning where you are, isn't it?
Exactly. I love to say that joke. It's it is for listeners. It is 12th of August today in New Zealand. 7:30 a.m. and Greg is in the UK, so it is 11th. 11th. Yes.
I'm a day behind.
It's actually, it is really fun, but like one of the difficulties is that it's really hard for, I think what my friend Luke Murray, a lot of people know him, he says when we go to sleep, the rest of the world wakes up. All the fun happens while we all sleep. Because we wake up and like if there is like something interesting on Twitter, or like some big events, it is like literally. And sometimes, for example, there's the AKS community call. It is on 4 p.m. I think UK time, and it is 4 a.m. for me. It's too early. We can't. We can't really wake up at this time. And it is good. It's all fun. I actually normally wake up 5 a.m. so it's not so bad. So. Yeah, actually, you wanted to say this, and now that we are live, I really think what you're doing is really inspiring. I think what you're doing is super cool, giving people a platform to jump in and then talk about their career path, talk about the interesting technology that they're working on, talk about all fun things in the Azure community. So this is really inspiring. And your story is actually also inspiring. And maybe one day we'll hopefully have you on our show.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Awesome. Yeah, that would be really great.
Just let me know. I'm not getting up at 4 a.m. though.
No.
I'm only joking. Ahmed, for people who don't know who you are, give us a little bit of an introduction.
Yeah. So, cheers. Thanks so much. I'm Ahmed. I'm a cloud consultant right now. I did network architecture for like 10 years. I used to be a network architect, and then at one time I like sensed the trend, and I felt that a lot of people, I always used to say that, but I think it's now changed. I used to say people are no longer in the business of building networks, but I think it's changing a lot now, because now in networking, you still build networks and it's the infrastructure, but you build it in a different way. As in, like, I used to be network architect in telecom, I used to be network architect in enterprise companies, but I think that happened when I came to New Zealand 5 years ago, and people were talking about Azure, and I was like, what is Azure? And it's like, it's a cloud. I was like, holy moly, you build stuff on the cloud? I was like, what is this magic? So
magic to me. Networking is magic to me.
yes, and it was really funny. And with time, I was like, oh, okay, so the easiest way I could think of it is a data center maintained by Microsoft. They give you a platform you build on top of, and it's been called the cloud because it's a catchy title. In any case, so I started to learn about it, started to experiment, and I loved it in no time. And what I did is that I leaned on what I have, the easiest. Like, I tried to jump into the world of cloud multiple times. It was really hard because each time you jump in, we were chatting before the show, is that the first 2 chapters of any book, it's like easy and slow and cool, and they immediately start to go into the details. The first thing that actually confused me, silly enough, was a resource group. And I was like, okay, what is a resource group? Why do we need a resource group and all of that? So I said, let me actually start with the things that I know, which is networking. So I said, okay, let me and the other thing that I find myself helped me a lot in learning is that if I learned it with the intention to teach it. So this makes it so much easier for me, because I could have a somewhat like like an audience in my mind, right? And I'm trying to talk to this to my audience and saying, okay, how do I explain a topic to someone who actually have no idea what a virtual network is like? How do you explain that to this person? And that makes it, excuse me, that makes it so much easier for me to actually learn it myself, because as soon as I go into deeper details, I was like, wait, this is a lot. So I go back to the whiteboard and use this as my guidance. So what I did is that I use networking to learn the cloud, and I created videos along the way. People were happy with those videos, come back. I was like, yeah, man, cool, that makes sense. And that encouraged me a lot. At one time, I started to be interested into, because the buzzword is just so compelling, cloud native. Okay, what is it? What does it mean to actually build a cloud native application? How to do that? And like, why would you actually want to build stuff in a cloud native way? So that got me interested into learning about things like about containers, about Azure functions, and I created 2 videos about those. And I also created in my last learning experiment is Azure Container Apps, which is it's a really great idea. And it's a really great idea. But basically, it is the serverless Kubernetes. So you don't see all the complexity of Kubernetes in. Oh, hey, Sachita.
And hi, Simon.
Hey, Simon, mate. Yes, so you don't see all the complexity of Kubernetes, which is awesome, because it's a great way for us to experiment, but you still have the powerful tool of Kida, Dapper, and the rest of the technology, which actually are just baked in, and which is even more awesome. So anyway, long story short, like I said, started as a network engineer, network architect, jumped into the world, again, DevOps solution architect, and now I'm a cloud consultant. And in my latest role as a cloud consultant, it's really beautiful, because I actually wanted intentionally to be a cloud consultant, because I do 50% business pre-sales, and then 50%, of course, leaning on my experience in in technology. So the idea is that, I wanted to know, like, what is the story that goes behind the scenes before you jump into work on a solution for a client. And I think you do this as well, because it is really interesting when you talk to the client, find what is they actually want, and then you translate the business talk or the requirement of the client into a roadmap that actually people can look at and implement. So that is a very long answer.
No, that's fine. I think there's a couple of things there. I think it's just quickly. I think it's really difficult sometimes when I'm speaking to customers to try and get the requirements of what they want, because some people aren't in cloud and they don't quite understand cloud, and they don't really understand the possibilities. And then when you start to explain it, it takes a bit of time. But yeah,
you're right. I think one other thing that you actually seen you do, which is amazing. I think you have a lot of session about Azure fundamentals, right? Azure 900. Yeah. So this is actually really interesting. And I think I recall that you mentioned someone from Microsoft told you this is one of the most popular exams that people actually take. It's really interesting. And I found it also really useful for me is that I even leaned in on the Azure Administrator exam, Azure 104, is that it gives you a lot of details about everything, or almost everything, but not in a lot of it gives you a lot of information about most of the Azure services, not in going into details.
Yeah.
And that gives you an idea of how to build stuff on Azure. For example, when you want to build a network, a VNet on Azure, right? So when you want to do that, the first step is that you think in your mind, where's my router? Where is my switch? Why are you just giving me something and say this is a VNet? And that takes some rethinking about, okay, so that's a VNet. it's a network. It's almost like a subnet within a router, if that makes sense to people. And then all the rules of networking is still the same, right? And then you've got another VNet, and that's another subnet. You route traffic between them. You've got VNet peering or BGP or whatever the rule, whatever the protocol or the way you want to make connectivity between those VNets. And from there, it becomes easy to actually, to build on top of. But you can't come to the cloud with, for example, lift and shift. And it's okay, lift and shift. It gives you access to a lot of beautiful and powerful tools on Azure that it is maybe difficult to have on premises. But if you're really not thinking about app modernization, if you're really not thinking about maybe having an Azure App Service or maybe a container or like having, I don't want to say Kubernetes is like a really advanced use case, right? When you have this big microservices, multiple containers, or like I should say services, talking to each other, and it becomes really hard to maintain using other services. That's when you say, okay, let me jump into Kubernetes.
Yeah. Here's a good question for you.
Yep. Do you think learning networking in context is easier than learning networking on-prem for someone in the IT who never? I actually do. Yes, I actually do. I think networking on Azure is much easier because, for example, one of the difficulties of learning networking on premises is for a layer 2 switch. On a layer 2 switch, there's a lot of details that is very confusing, like the MAC address, and then there's a possibility of a spanning tree, and you have to learn a lot of technology just to actually have an understanding of how to set up a layer 2 network. And I spent it's beautiful. That's what I love. Actually, I was in year 4 in university, and they introduced, I jumped into a networking course. And then the first thing that the instructor, or the professor at the time actually said, how does a packet actually go from, at the time, from Baghdad to, for example, to the US and come back again and not get lost? And I was like, wow, that's very interesting. Yes, exactly. So that's how I just got hooked on the idea of networking. I did that for 10 years. And the idea is that Microsoft takes care of all that complexity. You don't really need to worry about having a loop-free network in your network, or like you don't need to worry about MAC addresses and MAC security and all of that. It is the basic idea of networking is still there. And I've got my own theory. I think what's going to happen with time and more requirements, networking on Azure is gonna, and Azure and all the other cloud providers is actually gonna grow, and a lot of the complex scenarios that we've got on networking most likely is going to be built again in the cloud. Yes, they abstract away a lot of the complexity, which is beautiful. But with time, people was like, okay, what if I've got multiple offices? What if I want to send 80% of the traffic here and then 20 there? With more and more complexity and more maturity in the tool, Azure networking, we'll start to use the same ideas. So if you are in networking and you are worried that you're losing on all your learning, it's not going to go away. If you are new to networking, it's a beautiful time to actually jump in, because it's easy. In my mind, it's easy. It's all the complexity is taken care of, and you just start to plug in stuff together.
So I have a dev background. I never touched networking in my life. I couldn't even tell you what layer 2 stuff means, like, really, to be honest. Started doing Azure Architect as a job. Didn't really understand networking, and I was like, how can you do that? So I was like, I better learn this. Sat the exam and passed it. I'm still not an expert by any stretch of the imagination, but learned a lot. Learned how to peer it and learned how to set up networks.
Yes.
Still not that great at it, but I really enjoyed doing it. And I'm assuming a lot of the complexity is hidden, because I'm so glad it is, because I can just units and peer them, and I'm like, jobs are good, and that'll do me. If you had to ask me to set that up manually, I would not have a clue.
Actually, to answer your question about like the layer 1 and layer 2, it's a very networking terminology. The easiest way to think of it is that to divide the complexity of networking, they said we'll come up with what we call an OSI model, which is Open Standard something, I think Institute. So they say layer 7, where you got your application stuff like HTTP, gRPC, and all these beautiful technologies, and then step by step until you go to things like TCP, and then IP, which is layer 3, layer 2, and layer 1 is just the cables, right? When you go into when you are in a telecom company, or like a company that is building networks, this is really important. Like if someone is calling you, hey, this is not working, which layer is that working? Is it a layer 1? Is it layer 2? Then you could immediately jump in and try to fix the problem. On Azure, all layers are taken care of, like you don't see all that. It's just a network. You don't care if it's using layer 3, if you're using a layer 4, which is the beauty of it. But when you start, for example, doing an Azure firewall, that's when you need to understand, okay, for a firewall, I need to know the source IP and destination IP for the traffic, a source port, destination port. It helps to know that the IP is in a layer 3, the TCP UDP is a layer 4. But all that is that just a way to abstract the complexity and take all that complexity away, so that the idea is that you will be able to focus on which problem, which part of the cake or like layer is your problem. And my story is actually the other way around. Like I'm starting to learn how to develop stuff. Funny enough, in university, they taught us C and C++, and I really loved it. And they even told, we even learned assembly language, and that was really cool. They started with us from what we call logical operation, like AND and OR, exclusive OR, and all of those. They built on top of it with assembly, and then went into high-level language like C and C++. But I went into the networking world. I really loved it, and now I'm trying to go back to my roots. What I'm doing is that I'm using Microsoft Learn for C#, and I really want to learn C#. I've done some learning in Python, but I see a lot of C# is really powerful in a way. I think it is called typed or like static typed. I don't know. My terminology is still evolving. But the idea is that it makes running the application really faster. Makes you avoid having to go through a lot of trouble. So I said, sweet. Let me start go through the Microsoft Learn for C#, and then let me start to do some basic coding and so on and so forth. The idea is that because I'm interested in cloud native, and I recall once that I asked you on the show about the Azure developer exam, is that you need to, having a some programming language skills helps in the exam, but you still need to learn a lot more than that, like Azure events.
For that exam, you don't really need to know C# or a programmer. There's maybe there's really maybe 2 or 3 questions on it. I haven't done it for a wee while, but unless it's changed dramatically, it's more about hooking these things up. Like how would a message come in and going through a web app into an Azure function, and a message gets stored on a storage queue, service bus, and the message gets read off the queue, and event grid and all these things tied together. It's more about that. There are 1 or 2 questions about C#, but it's not really C# heavy from what I remember.
I think the idea then, the intention
more like being a developer in Azure and using the Azure solutions, not a developer writing C# and it's not really like that.
I got it. So the idea is that they don't want to teach. No, they don't want to teach. They don't want to examine you on the skills because they think of you as a developer. They want
it's not a C# exam.
Yes. It's not a C# exam. The idea is that, okay, you want to build stuff on as a developer on Azure. You need to know these technology. Okay, that makes it less scary then.
It's more fun when it's like that, because a lot of people are like, do I need to know async and parallelism and all that? Not really. I mean, there's a couple of questions on it, and you could, if you did a practice exam, you can go and read up on what you need to know, but you don't need to be a C# expert at all.
Yes.
The kind of thing they would ask you is like, how do you store a file on blob storage using C#? But that's not asking you about C#. It's asking you about how do you use blob containers and things like that in C# to store it. It's more about the kind of NuGet packages you would use, and how do you go about it? Not really C# as a language.
Oh, wow, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. I think, that actually makes it less scary for me, because I was super scared that I don't want to jump into the exam, and I don't like failing.
I'm the same. I overstudy because I don't like failing.
I overwork on anything that I do just to avoid the idea of failing. And I think one other thing that you mentioned, which is really cool, was practice exams. Those are super powerful. When you are working with a partner, you get access to some practice exams, and then you could use that. And those practice exams are really great into honing your skills, because it asks you a question. I was like, oh, okay, I didn't know that. And if you show the answer, it will tell you why this answer is right and why everything else is wrong. And they give you links into stuff to go and read about it, which is super awesome.
My formula is still, if you're going to do an exam and you don't know anything about that subject, right, do a practice test and get your score out of 50, and it might be like 2 or 3. Don't get put off by that. And then in a couple of weeks' time, come back and do it. And if you get more than 2 or 3, you've at least learned something. And then towards the end, when you think you're getting the hang of this, do it again. And if you're getting 70 to 80, I think at least you've learned something. Even if you don't do the exam, for a fact, like, do the AI stuff. If you don't know anything about cognitive services, go and try the exam, see what your score is, read about it. Might pique your interest. Then if you're going to study for it for a little bit, do it again.
Oh, it's actually a great idea.
Yeah, that's what I've done in the past. I did the networking exam, and literally I was like, I have no idea what this is talking about. It was all express-based stuff. So it was like a foreign language. I think I got like 10 out of 50, and I was like, I'm going to try this, and eventually passed it. So yeah, that's my.
Good on you. That's actually really. You encouraged me now to go and do the.
I think it piques your interest. You want to get a higher score, because I'm trying to teach people the AZ 900, and the minute I say exam at work, they're like, oh no, not doing exam, and I'm like, wait, let me show you what it looks like. So I brought up the test exam, and they're like, that's actually not too bad. It's not like working out stuff, and it's just A, B, C, or D, so it's not too bad.
Nice. Yeah, exactly. That's actually also another trick, is that once you do something, even if it's like really scary, once you start to work on it and do the basic thing about it, it becomes less and less scary. And I think the idea that you going into the portal and showing people like, okay, this is the exam. It's not so scary. It is asking you. And one thing that I found is that, I don't want to bash on any company, but Microsoft exams are really logical, as opposed to a lot of other exams that I took. Is that the Microsoft exam is that not going to ask you about a specific detail, like what is this, what is the number of this TCP port, or like what is this, or what is that, and those kind of questions. Sometimes you say like, why are you asking me this question? I could easily Google it. You could
just Google the docs.
Yes, ask me questions that are actually. For example, I did the FinOps practice recently, FinOps practitioner, and those questions that I got was so great. Is that the idea is that it puts you in scenarios as if you are in a case talking to almost. It's not all scenarios, but the question is in a way is like, what do you do if you've got this, and what are those options? And those, I was funny enough even learning through the exam. I was like, oh wow, that's really cool. I never know about this, and it was funny because. I went out of the exam and I was like, this is awesome. I learned things throughout the exam, which is super cool. And it's awesome that I passed in the end. I was like, when I finished the exam, I was looking through any congratulations or whatever it says. It said something funny as like, you passed the quiz. And I was like, what quiz? Is that all was a quiz? What is my exam? And then you hit another button that says you passed the exam. So I was like, okay, cool, cheers.
So before we go into the demos and talking about container apps, I'm getting a feeling that if you want to learn something, you want to learn it in public by doing courses and blog posts. Is that fair to say?
Yes. That's what I do.
Walk me through your thought process of that.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. So, for example, I want to yeah, that's a good idea. Before jumping into Azure Container Apps, let's talk about why did I actually think of Azure Container Apps. The first thing is that I wanted to learn what is a container. So in my mind, the good thing is that since I don't know what's the container at all, and I know that my audience will be in the same place, I was like, okay, let's actually go even before talking about what is a container, why would I need a container, right?
Yeah.
And basically, it comes back to an idea that you've got a virtual machine, which is contains the whole operating system, and then each time you've got another virtual machine, you have to copy the same. You have to have a full copy of the operating system each time. And that means a lot of storage, a lot of compute, a lot of memory. And even if you want to spin up a new VM, it takes time. If you want to upload and download a new image, it takes a lot of traffic and networking and all of that. So and the idea, turns out actually the idea of a container is not a new idea. The container is just a process running on top of an operating system. So people have dabbled into having multiple processes on Linux, and there's actually a very good article of someone saying like 50 years of history of the container. And until I came up with an idea, okay, this is why we need containers. What is the most popular tool to build containers, which is Docker? So what do you do is, I was like, what is the simplest way to create a container? And okay, so that I go through online. I found a document, and I was like, okay, that's too much details. Okay, so I tried to skim through the details. This is not important. This is not important. This is going to confuse people. And step by step, until I skim it to into like a really, really small version of saying, this is a Docker file doing nothing besides creating some variables for you to build your container. And it contains things like just the container name or whatever other variables needed to build that container. And then I build my content around it. I build the content around it, make it into a video, and then it takes people from like knowing nothing about a container and then ends up with them creating their first container. And nice. That's the joy of like of learning. Instead of me just going through presentation and telling you about something, I ended up with giving you a tool of building a container. And that's after going for a container, the next logical step for me was to actually go and see what are the containerized solutions on Azure. I looked on Azure CI. It was really interesting, but I thought I want to have something that would help me jump into Kubernetes. So Azure Container Apps is the closest you would get actually to the experience of having Kubernetes. I think ACI is built on top of a technology that is orchestrating containers, but it's not AKS, and it's got its own use cases. Yes. So to come back to your question, how do you come up with an idea of how do you come up with how do you learn actually? Is that I learn with one intention, is that I want to teach this, because as soon as I change my mentality, is that I want to learn. Because I want to learn, I can't stop, because I jump into every single detail.
Like a dog with a bone.
Yeah, exactly. I jump into every single details and I branch out, and in no time I spent like 1 or 2 months going really deep into technology, and I don't see that as productive. So I tell myself it's a mental trick to help me learn new technologies, and at the same time, it's beautiful because it ends up with me doing something that people find interesting. So that helps me not go into a lot more details than just the things that need to just get started. And then what I do is that the next step, I build on the idea that someone has already watched my previous video or article. So this way, I don't have to repeat all the learning. So if I talked about the VNet in the first video, the next video I'll talk about VNet peering. I'm not going to talk again what is VNet, because I've already talked about it in the previous video. But if I talked about VNet peering in the first video, that is too much, right? That is really too much. Having someone not knowing anything about VNet, and then now I'm talking about VNet peering, I'm doing the same thing that I face when I jump in a book, and they jump really into detail.
Someone on Twitter was describing that as like a ladder. So you climb the ladder step by step, and each video is like, they start off with the first step is like the introduction, and then you build on top of it. I really like that.
Wow. Yeah, yeah.
The other thing that's interesting is when I spoke to the guy at LinkedIn Learning, I said to him, what's the most popular stuff like across the whole teaching? He's like, it's always getting started in anything. He's like, getting started in like the Azure fundamental stuff is the number one thing that people want to get started in, and it's the thing that most people struggle with. So you doing getting started in Docker, like the way you're doing it in containers, is perfect, because there are people doing the deep dive stuff, but the people, most of the people still need, how do I get started with videos for different technology?
Yeah, exactly. And also the other thing that I do is that I try to slow myself down by always going through like a whiteboard or like a pen and a paper. Is that because if I just use a screen, I immediately jump into the next step. So, for example, I'm creating a series that I'm on Terraform on Azure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the first thing is like, what is Terraform? The next thing is that taking you like a step about how like to build a hello world. But in saying that, it is like a really, I'm going through the details, and I was like, wait. Sometimes I was like, okay, create your first configuration file, and then put those details in it. And then next I say, the next command you need to say Terraform init. And I was like, wait. Actually, I forgot to say, you have to save the file. And because it is, I could just like, it could be taken for granted that, okay, create the file. Of course, you need to save it, right? And then when you do the Terraform init, it's going to say, okay, this is the configuration file. That's what I'll use to download all the providers and the plugins that needed for me to have a working directory. But if you've got the idea of someone who's like completely new, if you miss this step, they might just be struggling. I was like, I'm doing everything this guy said. Why is it not working? And then you find out that he forgot to save the file.
I have an idea on how to get. I have an idea on that, right? I'll tell you a very quick story. When I worked at a previous job, it was my job to do disaster recovery, right? So with the whole process, I had to document the steps. So I create what's called a runbook of the steps, and then I give it to somebody, right? And I go, run that, and then fill in any gaps or any assumptions that I've missed, and then you pass it down the line. Right? So when the next person comes in or the new person joins, you go, here, run that and tell me what you come across. Because it's human nature to just assume stuff. It really is. Especially when you're like, oh, people don't know how to do that. And then they're like, how did I get this? Where did I get that detail from? And you're like, oh, well, I've just assumed that people know where that is. So I always like to take what's called a runbook and pass it to somebody. So if you're doing that, you can send it to me and I'll try it and I'll go, well, what about this bit? Or you've assumed that I know what you're talking about when I really don't. So that's my way of doing it. Yeah, I quite like that idea. Yeah. That's how you do documentation. Documentation for your solutions should be like that. Pass it to the next person and get them to update it.
Yeah, that is awesome. Yeah, that's right. Because there is a saying that it is, I like really this saying, is that it's called the curse of knowing. So as soon as you know something, you cannot unknow it. So the idea is that, that's why we assume, right? Like even if I come to a new technology that I have no idea about, sometimes I assume a lot of stuff because I build on top of what I already know. So that's actually a really great trick, is to give it to someone else, and then they will look at it and was like, it's not working.
We're doing what's called onboarding for customers at work, right? Simon's on here, so he'll probably make a comment about that. But I want our CTO to be able to do this. Like anybody, like the marketing people, I want to go, here's a document, go and do that and deploy this and see how you go on. And that's what documentation in my mind should be. Yes. Maybe a pipe dream, I don't know, but we'll see how we go on.
No. That's actually a really great idea, because if your documentation could actually be picked up by anybody, it's like actionable. It is like saying, okay, this is what you need to do, step by step. Anybody could do it, even if they don't know the technology, right? Even if they don't know what they're doing. Yes, it will work. This is, like you said, this is the best way to actually create a document.
Now, Simon's got a good point here. Let me just make this point. So he's like, we're trying to automate as much as possible, which is great, right? So you start off with the runbook, and then you go, oh, we could automate that step. We could automate that step, and then the runbook shrinks. So that's like, I always think like GitHub repos, someone should maintain it and touch it every 6 months minimum. To me, the
Correct.
docs are the same. People should be like updated. So the fact that I've passed this on to him, or he's passed that on to someone else, or passed it back, you can automate it, and then it starts to get automated.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's a really great point from that Simon mentioned, is that what I think that the idea of the next level is that once you create like the first, let's say you go through a learning and you go through the first 10 modules of it, or 10 videos, 10 articles. I think by that, when you reach that level, you could tell that person that, you know what, we took all this time to learn this and all these steps. By the way, there is like a similar, like a very easy way to do this using automation. The beauty of this is that once they reach this level, if it breaks, they could actually go back and fix it because they know how it was built, right?
Yeah.
And that's one of the things, like in any technology, and again, I'm leaning on my prior experiences, that it really helps to know what is behind the scenes. Microsoft is doing an amazing job in the networking world, and it is easy to build on top of. But if you're interested, just go there and you read like a CCNA type of book, or like a really basic networking. There's a very good book. It's outdated now. It's called Network Warrior from O'Reilly. It's a really good book. I actually found it really useful when I was studying for CCNA. This guy doesn't really get into the deep details. He just talks about stuff that he thinks is interesting. So anyway, what I'm trying to say, back to Simon's question, is that yes, it is actually a great idea to automate. It is also great to maybe know if what happens if it breaks, right? If it breaks, you know, oh yeah, I know what to do because I built it. Yeah. But I've reached a place where I could just click a button and it just works.
So my theory on that one is you should have a troubleshooting guide on every documentation for stuff like that. So when it goes wrong, where's the appendix troubleshooting? Like, have you tried this? Have you tried this?
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
I mean, maybe it's a pipe dream, but that's my.
No, it's actually I think we are in a very good place now. I have a lot of what is the word? I'm really thinking. I have a lot of. It's really positive what I think that generative AI is going to do. And there is a lot of things that it could go bad, but what I think is that in the future, when you've got this AI that you could actually privately train on your document, you could create things like, can you help me create a frequently asked questions? Can you help me create like a troubleshooting? And the difficulty sometimes I find when creating a new document or thinking about like brainstorming about an idea is that you have a lot of problems in your mind. Like first thing is that, is this really clear? Is the tone good? I want to become really more friendly. This word is really convoluted. That's a lot of things that slows us down, right?
Yeah.
And having generative AI take away those worries. Maybe in the future, you like. I remember you brought you had April on the show, and she was talking about GitHub doing amazing things, like does documentation for it, does troubleshooting for
code.
it,
yeah,
and comment the code. Yes, so I think we are in a good time now that troubleshooting documents or like frequently asked questions, or like if someone gives you a comment, you could easily go back and say, can you incorporate this comment into the document? And it would easily give you like some suggestion. I was like,
that would be awesome. I do know that AI for pull requests is coming out. It's going to look at the code changes you made and write the comments for, like, it's going to basically write the PR of what you've changed as the comment.
Wow.
I thought it was pretty cool. Because normally people just go, right, okay, whatever. Nobody really, well, unless you're an open source, nobody really pays attention to what they're writing in the comment. They'll maybe put one line, but if you don't put a comment in a year's time, you'd be going, I have no idea what I changed a year ago. So, hopefully that will help as well.
Yeah, exactly. Hopefully, sorry.
No, I was going to say, let's move on. I'm really keen to talk about your demos and stuff like that. So you're going to just do a quick Hello World Azure Container App. Cool.
Yes. Do you want me to, like, how do we
if you can share your screen, I can add it, and then I'll move it around.
Yeah, wait a second.
So down at the bottom, there's a bit that says invite. Present.
Present.
not invite, present, and then
share screen.
Yeah, and then if you give it a minute, I'll pop up.
A window, or wait a second.
You can share any monitor or anything like that if you've got duplicate monitors or whatever. Now, here we go.
Yeah. Can you see the?
Yes.
That's the.
I'll move us out the way, right? I'll move us out the way like this so you can see it better.
Yeah, so I'll talk just quickly about it before I jump into the demo.
Sure.
So, so the idea about Azure Container Apps is that it's an Azure solution to build for your containerized app. You build you build your container and then you deploy it in a serverless environment. You don't have to maintain the underlying infrastructure. And again, it's a serverless. It's a consumption based. So you pay only for what you use and when you use it, which is awesome. All right. So these are some of the basic concepts of Azure Container Apps. It's built on top of Azure Kubernetes. And again, like we said, you don't have to have expertise in Kubernetes. You don't have to have all the complexity, but at the same time, you still get a lot of the powerful features of Kubernetes. Things like automatic scaling, load balancing, and then of course, container orchestration. One of the most important and basic core concept, I should say, about Azure Container Apps is what is called an environment. I don't want to call it like a VNet. It is tempting to call it a VNet. It's a logical boundary to isolate your Azure Container App, and all the container apps. Maybe if I could zoom in, can I zoom in? Yeah. So this is the environment, and this is so basically you've got, for example, in here, you've got two container apps, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll talk about what is a replica and what is a revision. But you've got two container apps within an environment. And if you've got like a microservices where you want these container apps, one will be, for example, taking care of like an API to do, what is the word? If you want to pay like a Stripe, using a Stripe service.
Like a payment service.
Yes, exactly. A payment service. And then you've got like the database or like the catalog to say like this guy bought this, so let's go and update your inventory. Yeah. Yes. So you've got multiple container apps. You want all these container apps to talk to each other. You put them in one environment, right? You put them in this environment and they could talk to each other in terms of networking traffic directly. You don't have to do any routing. If you've got if you've got container apps that you don't want them to talk directly, so you put them in different environments, and then you have to go through and do some like traffic filtering or like make the connectivity happen, which is almost like having two VNets and then back again to like how do you maintain connectivity between those VNets. So an environment is like an isolation and a logical boundary. A container app share the same VNet, again, easy communication, no complex routing, and then container apps in the same environment have direct each other. To segregate container apps, put them into different environments. The next concept that is important here, which is the idea of a revision. So the revision is like a snapshot of a version of your container app. Anytime, so when you first create a container app, you've got a revision. As soon as you change the container image, or like say you change any setting, for example, if you change the scaling rule, that would trigger the creation of a new revision. And the idea of an immutable snapshot is that it will give you another revision, so that if something happened or failed, you could go back to the prior one. So basically, you don't have one version of your app. Each time you change it, you get a new revision, right? And the other benefit of having a revision is that what we call traffic splitting. So the idea is that, for example, if you have an idea about changing your application and you make some change to the code and then you deploy a new container image, you don't want to send all the traffic right away to the new one. You want to test it. You want to make sure that everything is right before going live. So what you do is you use something called traffic splitting. So you send 80% of the traffic to the old stable version that everybody's happy with, and then 20% of the traffic, if nothing happens and if you are facing no problem, you could switch traffic basically to the new version. So that's one of the benefit of having multiple revisions of your container app. The third most important concept in a container app is what we called a replica. A replica basically is the same revision, but multiple times. Well, the idea this happens is that when you have the demand increases, sorry, of course, I'm going too fast just for the sake of
you're
the
fine,
time.
you're fine.
Sweet. When the demand increase on your container app, you want to scale your container. So what happens is that you scale up, which is in this case, I don't want to what is the word? Horizontally. Yes, I don't want to miss the word. That as in you have multiple replicas of your app. So with more demand and more load on your application, Azure Container Apps automatically, using KIDA, of course, would trigger the creation of new replicas. When the demand decrease on your container app, it would start to kill those new replicas, and you could scale down all the way to 0, or sometimes to a minimum number. So, for example, you could set up you could set the minimum number of 1 or 2. The idea is that if you scale it down to 0, and then some new customer comes, the first customer is going to suffer because when he comes, he wants to use your app. It's going to take time to actually spin up a replica. And if you don't want to have that, or you don't want to have that delay for your first customers, you have a minimum of 1. You would always be paying for this one, of course, but you could scale down to 0. It depends on what you want, right? But if you've got more and more customers, you could get more and more replicas. So those are the 3 most important concepts in Azure Container App. I'll talk now about a little bit of the open source technologies, Dapper, Envoy, and KIDA, that is actually built in within Azure Container Apps. And then those technologies, those are the same technologies you actually use with microservices and Kubernetes and on all of that. So the beauty of this is that when you learn more about Azure Container Apps, all those learning could actually translate when you want to experiment maybe with Azure Kubernetes or any other Kubernetes version. The first one we'll talk about is actually Dapper. So basically, Dapper is a runtime. It's like a set of building blocks that gives you functionality you don't want to build within your code, right? So if you want to do like a service discovery, if you want to do, if you want to have like an event-driven architecture with a PubSub solution, you don't want to have this code within your application. You want to just talk to an API from Dapper that will provide you the service. And they are adding, they're adding more and more blocks and more APIs to help take away a lot of the common problem that you face with microservices architectures. Is that it's like it's in the way it is helping multiple applications talk to each other. It doesn't matter which programming language or framework you're using. And that's the beauty of it. I think you could actually theoretically migrate between clouds and still have the same code. And I think I was reading through the documentation. You could even run your application in Edge and in the edge of the network, I think, on IoT devices and the rest, and still not worry about connectivity and all of that, because Dapper would give you like a building blocks to take care of that. So that's one of the open source technology built within Azure Container Apps. The other one, which is of course my favorite, the Envoy proxy, which is the one doing networking for you. It provides what we call like a networking for cloud native apps. An Envoy proxy is actually a really popular technology that a lot of other solutions doing the same actually build on top of, right? So I think Istio has built on top of Envoy, but I could be mistaken. So basically, Envoy, what Envoy does is that it takes care of all the connectivity, for example, to the rest of the world. So if you've got your Azure Container App and you want to connect this Azure Container App to the internet, the Envoy proxy would be sitting in the middle doing doing like TLS termination, doing like traffic interception. So it would do all the authentication, authorization, encryption. If you want to do traffic rate limiting, all those beautiful things that are important and useful for you if you want to have a connectivity in a cloud native app. Envoy would actually do that for you. And again, this technology is baked in within Azure Container Apps. And again, whatever learning you get here, you could easily use this, build this on top of this learning when you use other technologies. And the last technology that I want to talk about is KEDA. KEDA, actually. I don't know if it's KEDA or KEDA. I think it's KEDA. KEDA is an open source event-driven autoscaler. I think it stands actually for Kubernetes event-driven autoscaling. The idea is that if you want to scale your app with triggers beside memory and CPU utilization, for example, if you've got CPU above 70 or 80%, you want to have another replica of your container app, or memory above 70 or 80%, you'll have another replica. But if you've got other triggers, which KEDA they call it scalers, if you want to have other triggers, like for example, if you've got messages in a service bus, or like if there is an event in the Azure Event Hub, or like the amount of HTTP requests that is, for example, in this case, if it passes 100 HTTP requests on your app, you say that will trigger an event or a scaling event, and then KEDA would spin up another replica of your Azure Container Apps. So the idea of what I was trying to do is that if you go through the documentation, it's going to be really confusing when you go to the details. I was like, what is an environment? What is a replica? And what is a revision? What is DAPA or Envoy or KEDA are actually doing? My plan for this video was that help you navigate the document, and when a document saying that this is going to trigger a creation of another replica, you actually know what's a replica and what events actually trigger a scaling event. So that is a very high level
that's cool.
That's very high level about the understanding of Azure Container Apps. What I'll do now, can I share my VS Code?
Yeah, go for it. Yeah, totally.
Okay, so stop sharing, and then present again. Share screen. Windows.
Don't worry about time. We've got all the time in the world, so we don't need to. Don't worry about time.
Okay. Is this?
Yeah, that looks good. I can see that fine.
Oh, yeah, that's good. Good. Cool. Yeah. So the idea is that you could do this by using Azure Cloud Shell, or you could sign into. You could use your Windows Terminal or Windows subsystem for Linux. In this case, I don't know if my session is still. I think my session is still on. You need to use Azure AZ login first, which is an Azure CLI command that would trigger would open up a portal and then ask you to give the username and password to log into your Azure portal, so that you will sign into your Azure subscription. So this way you would be able to start to create resources using the command line. I've logged in before the session. I don't know if it's still on, but hopefully it is still on. The first thing that you need to do before you create an Azure Container Apps using Azure CLI is that you need to add an extension called Azure AZ extension for the container app, because by default Azure CLI does not support the creation of Azure Container Apps. So I've done this, of course, before, and I think running this again would not. Just a second. Let me just copy, paste. I think it's not going to do anything because it should say already installed. Already installed. Sweet as. Yeah, so the first thing is that you need to make sure that you add this extension to enable the creation of Azure Container Apps using Azure CLI. Next, by default, as an Azure subscription does not actually contain the service of creating an Azure Container App. And for that, you need to register what is called a Microsoft.app namespace, and then log analytics namespace. And again, those are the commands for those. I've done this again before. So And let's write here, Azure Provider Register new namespace. It might take a while, but in this case, I've already done it. And again, you need to do the adding of a namespace, for the log analytics, because apparently you can't actually create an Azure Container Apps without having log analytics, because when you first create a Azure Container Apps, it needs to associate it with a log analytics. These are just some variables to make the code actually easier to read. I did this prior to, wait a second, let me see if I could actually, okay. And this is for the resource group. I'm going to call it Azure Greg Resource Group. Let's set the location for where do I want to provision my container apps, which is Australia East, the closest to me. And again, for you to create an Azure Container Apps, the first thing you need to, of course, you need a resource group, but the first thing you need to create is an environment for you to create the, which we just talked about, for you to create an Azure Container App. So I'm just creating variables here so that I would reference those variables back in the code. So in here, it's saying my RG stands for the resource group, my location is for the region where I want to spin up the resource, and then my app container environment is the name of the container app environment, right? So, and now we want to create the resource group. I hope the Azure CLI code not very confusing. Basically, the Azure CLI code is that you start with AZ for any command, and then you define like which subset of commands you want to talk about, in this case, which is a group or a resource group. And then you say what you want to create, delete, what is the thing that you want to do. Next, you would say, what is the name of the resource group? In this case, I said, use the variable myrg, which is in here. This is the resource group name. If I remove, like, for example, this, copy it here, and I say the name is this, right? It's going to still give me the same result. But the idea is that in the future, this will help you not change a lot of your code, because if you want to change the resource group, you don't have to change this line. You just go here and then give it another resource group name, and it would run. And again, the location is where you want, which region you want to spin up your, you want to create. In this case, we are going to create a resource group. Sweet, we created the resource group. And then next, we need to create the environment. Again, as you can see, the AZ container app environment create. What is the name of the environment you want to give? And in this case, it's going to reference the variable here. What is the resource group? We created this resource group, so we are going to reference it here, and again, the location. So we copy this code, and then paste it here. It's going to take a second, I think. No log analytics provided. It is going to create a log analytics. Yeah, so it gave it some randomly generated, randomly generated name. And then for a second, it's going to think and then give me a result that it actually created the environment. The last thing we'll do is create the container app. And in this case, what are we doing is that we say in Azure Container App, create. And yes, this is done. Sorry, guys. This is done. So this is the name of the container app. This is the name of the resource group, environment, the image base that we will be using, which is an image public provided by Microsoft, saved on Microsoft Container Registry. This is the target port. This means that this is how you would be accessing it. Target port 80 means you will be accessing this container app using HTTP, which is the TCP. The TCP port for HTTP is port 80. The word ingress means, when we say ingress external, that means we are gonna make this container app publicly accessible. And then finally, the last command, we are saying, give me the URL of the container app that you just created. So we'll see if this actually works. Let's copy this guy, paste it here.
Let me add a wee drum roll.
Yes, please. Please work.
Pay to the demo gods.
I know, pay to the demo gods. Okay. Good.
Can you put that in the chat and I can try that?
The URL. Yes.
There's a private chat. Can you put that in there?
Yep. Copy. And then this is the private chat. Paste. Yes, please try it.
Yep.
And hopefully it works. Yeah, if you can share your screen, it should say, just give you a hello world saying.
Yeah, that's, yeah.
It did work?
Yeah, you can try it as well if you want. Do you want to just do it on yours?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you could control click, with ask you to open, and then I think I need to share different screen now. Stop sharing, and then, sorry, let's go back, present, share screen, share. And this time window. Nope. Sorry, just a second. Let me do one thing.
I can do it. I'll share mine. Hang on,
yes.
Let me just move. Let me just move that. So that's me.
Yes. Welcome to Azure Container Apps.
Yes.
Voila. Yeah. So basically, that's what I do. That's the idea is that you could use this code and then go back and say, I created my first container app, right?
That's really cool.
Yeah, and you could go to the portal. You could open up the container apps and go through, for example, the details about the environment, what else you could change. Go back to the document, see if you could play with the configuration. But basically, that's the easiest. All what we've done is just preparation. For example, adding the extension for the Azure CLI, you do it only one time. The defining of variables, do it one time. And what we just created is a resource group, an environment, which is needed for every container app. It needs to know where is it going to sit. And then finally, the actual container app. So 3 steps. A resource group, which is you need it for every resource, for every Azure service or resource you create on Azure. An environment in this case, and then container app. Voila. Of course, they are much more complex. This is what I'm hoping for in the future. You could have multiple containers talking to each other. You could have KDA to scale, like you could configure KDA. You could, for example, in this case, instead we can't have like 100 sessions on our container. What I could do in my mind is that I'll put the threshold at 5 or 3, right? So I open up 3, 4 tabs to the container. Most likely the 4th one is going to trigger the creation of a replica. And then just like that, you tested KDA.
Yeah, that's a good way of learning stuff like that.
Yes. Sorry again, I was really quick because I just
no, that's fine. That's fine. See, are you going to?
Did it actually make sense?
Yeah, no, absolutely does. It's piqued my interest. I'm going to go and play with it a little bit more.
Awesome.
Yeah, because I like trying things like Chaos Studio and breaking stuff.
Yes.
I like breaking stuff, and so I could use it as a load test and Chaos Engine to code. Yeah, because I like playing with different tools in Azure just to see what's happening. So that would be quite a nice little scenario.
Azure Chaos Studio is on my to-do list. Hopefully, I'll get to. Not to do
I need to try and get somebody onto them or that. Maybe Wesley or somebody. I'll have a think. Yeah, no, that was really good. Awesome. Are you going to put this in a blog post or?
Yes, and the idea is that I've got this one on a video, but this one was the video was only talking about the theory or like what. The first one. Yeah. Next video, I want to say I will be creating a video about comparing when would you actually pick Azure Container Apps, because you've got Azure App Service, you've got Azure CI, you've got Azure Functions, you've got
Yeah, there's quite a lot. There's quite a lot of
So there are 4 or 5 Azure services that would actually in the end. So if you've got a container for a web app, I don't think it makes sense for you to actually build it on Azure Container Apps, because Azure App Services will provide you a lot more out of the box that you need for a web app, right? So like the TLS, the HTTPS certificate. You could tell that I'm just going through the learning. But what I'm saying is that for an Azure App Service, if you want to, for a web app, it makes sense to build it on Azure App Service. But if your application is actually way more complex and there's more, but still not, so you get like 4 or 5, I would say, maybe more containers and you want all these guys to talk to each other, of course, it makes sense to use Azure Container Apps. But if it's like a really big enterprise grade solution, of course, that when you go back and lean in on Kubernetes. But the idea is that I want to learn Azure Container Apps while like I'm just building container, not container, working on Kubernetes locally on my machine. I was going through a book it was talking about Kubernetes, and then you install the Docker desktop, and apparently there is a configuration that you just tick a check and you immediately have Kubernetes on your local machine. And I was so happy when I actually found that you just run a couple of commands, and then I was like, oh, I could say to myself that I've done some Kubernetes.
I like your style. I like your style of learning stuff. Hands-on.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you
I
so
like
much.
the way you're explaining it and thinking about the things, because a lot of people just jump straight in and then go, I don't understand that, and then give up. Yeah.
Yes. I feel that is I feel that's a really big shame, and I know that a lot of smart people, really smart people, like you say, go and create a book, and it is awesome if you are at that level, right?
Yes.
The problem is a lot of people actually can't even pick this book up because it's so scary for them. So what I'm hoping is that I'll build up enough of the knowledge for anyone in the end when they start to use this book. And of course, I'm hoping again to venture into more complex and difficult material. But that's the beauty of it. That's the beauty of what you do.
I think that getting started is the hard part.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
Getting started is the hard part, and what I also tell myself is that if I don't know, like I know that Azure Containers is really deep, Azure Kubernetes is also really deep, but that should not stop me from actually experimenting with a basic scenario or like an what is it called, MVC, minimum viable, or MVP. I don't know what's
Yeah, I know what you mean. Kind of project a certain level.
Yeah, minimum viable project or something like that. Yes. Yeah. So the idea is that you would experiment with this, and I was like, okay, so I've got one container, which is awesome, can access it, beautiful. What if I have two containers? Why does it actually make sense to have two containers? Why do they want to talk? And of course, there are so much material already available on Microsoft documentation and in the community, but of course, it's on different levels. So that's what I do. I take it step by step and.
No, that's great.
Yes.
That's hats off to you for doing that, because some people, a lot of people just assume a lot of knowledge, which is really difficult. Not my problem is I don't like black boxes. I like to understand stuff, because the minute it goes wrong, that's when I need to know what I know. I don't like when things break and I don't know why it's broke, because it's like black magic. Not a fan of that.
Yes, exactly. And I know that Azure Kubernetes is not Azure, I should say Kubernetes is trying to solve a really complex problem. It's a really big problem, and that's why it has to be that complex, unfortunately. But there's a lot of great work that like your colleagues, Richard, and then Carl, I think Wesley, a lot of people. I don't want to name people, but a lot of people in the community go in there talking all they can about the AKS community or like the cloud native community, making it easier for people to actually experiment with it. And I'm hoping to do the same. So what I do is I lean on, like, I need to learn this, and then maybe in the way someone else could think of it as useful.
That's awesome, because it really is difficult to try and pitch it at the right level. People just jump in and it's like, here's this wonderful thing and it's very awesome, but you're like,
sometimes. Sorry.
No, you
go. Sometimes, like even the simplest, sometimes even simple technologies are actually, fortunately, becomes convoluted, like using Git or GitHub. And nothing's stopping you from using GitHub if you've got a VS Code and using the portal. Don't be ashamed of. Like, this is what I tell myself. Don't be ashamed, or like anyone, of using the portal. You don't have to be buried in the CLI just to think this is the right way. Yes, it is more powerful to use CLI. It is most powerful to use the code. But if you've got the same functionality in the portal, like whether it's a GitHub portal or like the Azure portal, there's no shame in doing this using the portal if you are learning. Of course, in the future, if this is a production environment, please don't use the portal. Just use infrastructure as
you
code.
make a good point there. Yeah, even Git commands. I use Visual Studio Code and I use VS. I don't learn the commands in Git because I've got not enough time to learn all that.
No,
you know?
exactly.
I don't write code anymore. When I was using code, I was doing command line, but I don't do that anymore.
Actually, that's great, because coming back to the idea of to the question of Simon, which is about automation. This is what, in a way, it is what this is all about. So, like, if if you right click on something, or like if you use a VS Code or whatever, and behind the scenes it's a lot of code that just does that for you. I don't really have to dive into every single detail of it. If it's important to learn, yes, but if it works without me having to go into the details, I don't need to do that. Yeah.
Without a doubt. Ahmed, let's bring up, before we go, let's bring up your, so this is your YouTube.
Yes. Cheers, thank you.
What have you got on there? You've got your networking playlists.
Yes. So, yeah, that's right. I've got, I think it's now 19 or coming close to 20. I've got a lot about Azure networking, and even going back, and I'm thinking maybe I could break it into maybe smaller pieces. I've done some, I think I talked about Azure Functions, Kubernetes, not Kubernetes, containers, and then Azure Container App. I'm planning to have multiple videos on Azure Container Apps before I maybe jump into AKS. The other thing is that I'm thinking thinking a lot about creating a blog. I did.
You're not got a blog at the moment?
No. I've got a website. I've put only one article on it, which is understanding the need of damper. The website is IA Max, again, just like the YouTube, iamax.com. It got only one article, but I'm planning to publish three. Sorry?
There's nothing wrong with having one article. It's a good start.
Yes. There is a place for the video. There's a place for a blog. It depends on the format of the content. Like sometimes it really makes sense to have it as a blog post. Yes, that's the one. Cheers, thank you so much. Yeah, and sometimes it is a video.
Yeah, I mean, I used to blog religiously, and then I kind of got bored blogging, to be honest, and I wanted to start doing videos.
Yes.
So now what I try and do is I try and write a blog post that describes what I'm going to do, and then I show the video as well and part of it. But
correct. A video is so much easier to actually take people through a complex task. For example, if you got a video, you just say, okay, you create the video. You create the file. Our example about Terraform, you create the file, you save it. The people are like watching you while you take them through the step. But if you put it on a blog post, it's really hard. It becomes really long because you have to save it now, and then you have to do this now, and then you have to do this now.
Yeah.
A video would be 2 to 3 minutes. Yes.
Yeah. I got fed up with it. I'm going to press record and just go through this slowly.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Right. One thing before we let you go. So, two things actually. That's your Twitter. So if anyone wants to get in contact with you there, I did have your LinkedIn, but I somehow managed to lose that.
Yeah, it's just the same thing as like LinkedIn-IN and then -Ahmed Muhi.
Let me just. I don't like not showing people's LinkedIn. Give me 2 seconds. The weird thing is, normally I can link to people's. Profiles. I couldn't with yours for some reason. It's really odd.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I don't know why. Because this is Ahmed. Where is it? Where did it go?
Yeah, it's like LinkedIn.com.
Yeah, I've got it.
And then Ahmed Muhi.
Clicking all the wrong buttons as usual. That's you there.
I
think it's because you've got a slash at the end. It doesn't let you do it. I'm not sure.
Really?
Yeah, but it's weird because like normally you type somebody's name in LinkedIn and do @ and then their name, and it
Oh
gave me a
yes,
link,
yes, yes,
but
yes.
it didn't with yours, and I was like, what is going? And it was definitely right.
Are we connected? We are connected on
Yeah,
LinkedIn.
no,
That's
we're
very
connected.
strange.
Yeah,
Oh
yep,
wow,
yep.
yeah. There
Last
is not a
thing I
lot
want.
of
Sorry,
not a
anyway.
lot of Ahmed Muhi in the
No,
world.
there
So.
isn't. No. You came up, and I was like, why is it not linking? Last thing I want to ask you about.
Yes,
Tell me a
yes.
little bit about your podcast. Tell us about that.
Oh yeah, thanks so much. Appreciate it. Yeah, so the idea about Azure All Stars. It's a podcast that I've got with my great
Friend Luke,
friend Luke.
who's
Luke
actually
Moran.
on next Wednesday. He's on here next
Oh
Wednesday.
yeah, really? Yeah, that's awesome. He's a superstar. He's the
Yeah, I
first
met him
one I
in
actually.
Seattle. Met him in Seattle this year. Super nice
Yes,
guy.
he told me about it. It was a really
Yeah.
funny story. He's like, you met you in the elevator and then you immediately recognize each other,
Yeah,
even though that you've
I
not
recognise
seen
him.
each other before.
He's like, who are you? Hilarious.
Yeah. So the idea is that I went to a lot of events, a lot of community events, and a lot of events sponsored by Microsoft, and I go there and meet a lot of interesting people, and I really wanted a way for me to actually talk to these people and then understand more about their career and journey. And by the nature of an event, it's like 1 hour, hour and a half. People just go back to their work and life. So I thought about it for a while. Then I talked to Luke, and he. Thank you, Luke. He's like, yeah, that's actually sounds like a really great idea. So we thought about it, and we still actually are evolving it. And then each time we meet someone in the community, we talk about their career. It's really laid back. It's like there is no right or wrong answer to the questions that we ask. We just want to tell people the whole idea. Yeah, the idea is that it's not really hard to jump into the world of cloud or the world of technology, specifically Azure, because when we talk about the story of people, you've got someone coming from all sort of backgrounds, and the beauty about the people that we meet is that these people all have one thing in common, which is giving back. And that's that's the beauty of it. So these people are like always in community events. They are always giving back in one way or another. And once the beautiful thing about the platform that I was telling Luke about it the other day is that it's really interesting to talk with someone about their career and their the path that they ended up in the cloud or like in technology. Because it's kind of hard. Like if you're in an event, you're not going to ask someone else like, "How did you start doing this?"
Yeah, exactly. You're not really going to ask them like, "Tell us about your career from 20 years ago."
I was like, "What are you asking about?" Yes, I think the platform your platform, the platform we created, it's a beautiful place where people just like yourself and myself come in, and then a lot of other, of course, people come and talk about something interesting that they're working on, but in the same time talk about the career. And it's similar to the example that you gave about like opening a portal, showing people like this is the practice exam. It's not scary, right? If you see someone who's like gone through the same in a similar boat where you are right now, you look at it and it's like, okay, that's easy. You don't have to have a computer like a computer science degree. It helps, yes. I'm not bashing against degrees, but yes, because I got a degree. It's awesome, but a lot of people in this community, they didn't need a degree. They just like have their own passion. It's beautiful. They went in there, interested, learned. Yeah. So long story short, this is the idea of the
nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
Is there a big community in New Zealand for Azure, or is it small?
Yeah. It is there is a big community. It's scattered all over New Zealand. We are lucky in the Auckland community. We because we've got Microsoft office in Auckland. There is one in Wellington, the capital of New Zealand. But Microsoft people in Auckland actually do a lot of the sponsoring. They give us the venue place that we have the meetup, and they reach out to people in the community for sponsoring for the pizza and the rest. Most important thing, the pizza. Yes. So, and with time, a lot of other communities all around New Zealand started to tune in. So we changed it to be called Aotearoa, which is in New Zealand in the native language of the Maori people, native people. So we called it Aotearoa Azure. And now the meetup is in person if you're in Auckland, And of course, even if you are not, you could tune in online. But at the same time, we've got people all over New Zealand tuning in. And we've got people in person, me and my friend Rory, which is a new guest. I'll have him on our show. And then Luke is doing an amazing job online, talking to people. So we're tackling both fronts.
Nice. Good stuff.
Yes.
Good. You enjoying doing it?
Yes, actually, yeah. I've been going to this meetup for a very long time, and then there was an opportunity for me to actually work and co-host it, and I was like, yes, I want to do this. So, yeah. Cheers, thank you so much. The beautiful thing about the tech community is the people. It is like the feeling of being included. The feeling if that, like, you could go on Twitter really and then say, just put a question, say, I don't know how to do this, and you'll be immediately amazed about how much people jump in. And if someone doesn't know the answer to it, they just retweet it, and it's like, can you please someone help?
Will pick it up. Yeah.
Yes,
There's lots of times I'm like, I have no idea, but I'll retweet it and somebody will pick it up. Yeah.
Good on you.
Yeah, I'm always amazed when I come across really good tech people when I'm like, are you on Twitter? And they're like, no. And I'm like, really?
Why?
Like,
yes,
and they're like,
yes.
Why would I go on that? And I'm like, well, let me show you. And then they're like, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah. I think you guys created the Cloud Family hashtag, which is beautiful. And actually, that's how I found out about you. I first actually followed Luke, and he's like really active, and I like can't compete with his energy. Yes, and then I saw him. Twitter is where it is at. Oh yes, exactly. Yes, agreed. Yes, and then found out about yourself, Richard, Carl. I don't know, a lot of like April, Robert. I don't know, you name it. Simon. A lot of the people from your show.
You need to call him Simon the Dinosaur Guy.
Oh yeah, I heard about this. That's awesome. Really looking forward to this one.
He's crapping himself because he doesn't know what he's like surfing for. But anyway, I'll be sitting recording it.
Good on you, Simon. That's awesome. And again, on your show, I've seen amazing people that you bring in. Suchita, she's actually on the call now, and a lot of amazing people.
I love speaking to people I've never ever met or spoken to before.
Good on you. I listen to your broadcast all the time. I'm like going to come to the fuel station or like doing something around the house. I just put it and listen to it, and it just amazes me. People's stories are just great. And
we've got a podcast at the moment, and. I'll tell you a really quick story. I went to the MVP summit, and I got out of a taxi, and this lady nearly ran me down. And it turned out she came in to apologise, and it's a lady called Azure. And I sat down with her, and she's like, "Do you want me to give you a lift to the Microsoft campuses the rest of the week?" And I was like, chatting to her, and she is the most amazing person I think I've ever spoken to. And the fact that I had never spoken to her or ever met her in my life, and I cannot wait to get her on here because she's running a company with like 40 people in it across 2 countries. And it's just one part of the year and stuff like that. And I really can't wait to go on. She was just sitting there and I was like blown away with this person. And it was funny meeting me. She nearly knocked me down because I ran in front of it. It's my fault. I ran in front of her. And it was just brilliant. And
good on you. I really like
your podcast.
I see that a lot of the things that you do on Twitter is really amazing. For example, I see as soon as you find someone doing something interesting, I see that you reach out and say, would you want to join my stream? I think you reached out someone to working on Azure developer CLI, and she was talking about a new version, and I see that you said, would you like? I don't know if she's really great if she joins. So that's amazing.
Because it's on my to-do list to go and research, and I've not had time. So I'm like, I'll get her on to explain it, and I'll learn by asking silly questions. Like I like to ask staff questions so that I can try and understand it as I go.
Good on you. That's awesome. You bring in someone who knows it, and it's like, you tell me about it, and
well, everyone else will get to ask questions as well. That's the point there. Right, we better call it quits because we've been going for like an hour and 20 minutes.
That's awesome. I love it. And
thank you very much for your time. And
thank you.
I just want to say thanks for joining because I know you join nearly every one of them. So thanks very much for doing that. I appreciate it.
Cheers, thank
Luke's on Wednesday. I don't know what we're chatting about. Probably about the podcast and you and New Zealand and Azure stuff.
Yeah, looks experience is just amazing, and he is.
He's a good guy.
Yeah,
Spent a lot of
exactly.
time at Ignite. It was really
Oh
good.
yeah.
Yeah, it was
He
brilliant.
is. Yes, he's
Sorry,
really amazing. His energy is infectious, and he is always experimenting and stuff. And his version of he learns something very similar to what I'm doing. He's like he learns something, he put a blog post on it, and his blog post is just amazing. I remember one time when I was reading about Azure Bastion, I was looking through documentation, and I stumbled upon his blog post, and it's amazing. It is very similar to what I do. He talks about it, puts some code for you to use. And voila, you've got Azure Bastion. I was like, okay, that's easy. That's easy. That's so hard.
Brilliant. Right, thank you for coming on. So just to recap,
Thank you, sir.
Luke's on Wednesday at 8:30, same time as today. So just remember and press like on the way out and subscribe and click the bell if you haven't. Thank you very much. Let me just play my wee outro video. Stay where you are, Ahmed, and I'll chat to you in 2 seconds if you don't mind.
Sweet nice.
Thanks everyone for watching. Susheta and Simon, whose name I nearly forgot there. I nearly pressed the wrong video.
Thank you, sir.